Hello my friends and welcome to my first video of 2025. Today I still need to wrap up all of the books that I finished reading by the end of 2024. So I need to go over what I read in September, October, November, and December. I'm not going to go into a lot of plots for all of these, but more so give you a general idea of what it's about and more so focused on what I thought about them. If you want to hear more about the actual synopsis of these books, I would recommend watching my September TBR video where I really go into depth about the synopsis, especially more so than I will now. So in September, I read 6 books. 2 were audiobooks, 2 were ebooks, and 2 were physical books. And the first one I ended up finishing was The Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless. And this one, I didn't think that I would be interested in it because it's very heavily a historical fiction with kind of just a little bit of magic. But this was really interesting and I really enjoyed it. And it talks a lot about politics within Ireland and England and these gods that are trying to get rid of another race of magical beings. It's kind of difficult for me to explain the plot for this one, but this was really interesting and I listened to this on audiobook thankfully because a lot of the names were Irish, and so if I was reading that I would have mispronounced literally every single name. So if you're interested in reading this, I would definitely recommend the audiobook because the narrator is Irish. So, they're pronouncing the names actually correct. I actually can't stop thinking about it because it was so like heavily focused on politics and especially like this one woman who would do anything to get more power and to get to a higher position and manipulate and do whatever she needs to do to get to the top. It's not very heavily focused on like fantasy and those magical aspects. It really is at its core a historical fiction, historical fantasy, and I really enjoyed it. The politics were just really interesting. It's definitely something like that I felt was very engaging. At times it was a little bit confusing and I could feel my focus slipping a little bit where I would get confused, especially with the names of different characters and their positions, because this is a pretty big scale of, war against Ireland and England. But other than that, I would definitely recommend the series. The next book that I finished in September was Storm Dancer by Jay Kristoff, and this was his debut novel. And I love Jay Kristoff so much. He is definitely one of my top favorite authors. And so it was really interesting to see, the previous book that I read from him was Nevernight. And so it's really interesting to see the range of his writing ability and how he can change styles, but at the same time, there's still something that's so fundamentally like Jay Kristoff that you can hear it within the tone of his writing, but it is still very different when it comes to these different stories. But anyways, this was actually really entertaining. I really loved the found family aspect, kind of when it comes to the main character. What's her name? Yukiko, and the griffin that she ends up discovering, and how they really foster a very deep relationship with each other and they really end up caring for each other. And I think that I will always love a plot about taking down the empire. So this was definitely what this was centered around, though I can see that in the next one it will go into a lot more depth about rebellions and plans to take down the empire. And so I think this was a very interesting and intriguing start. The main plot that is talked about in the synopsis happens really soon within the book. So, when I got past that part, I was like, there's still so much more to read about. Like, what is the story going to be? So it really does take its time to set up getting to know different characters and I guess their relationships with each other, though there still is a lot that kind of goes unsaid because especially in Asian and Japanese culture, like talking about your emotions isn't as big of a focus. So there's a lot that's still being unsaid, but this was very emotional as well when it comes to her background. And so I don't know, I really connected with the characters and like I was invested in their relationships with each other and it was very enjoyable. The next book that I finished in September was Nestlings by Nat Cassidy, and I've read Mary by Nat Cassidy in a previous month. At this point I don't remember, and he he definitely has some unsettling themes and writing and the plot, and I had no idea where this was going, which, is part of the intrigue, but I'm not sure that it ended up where I would have wanted it to end up. At the end of the story, I was still kind of like jarred by what had happened because I don't know if I really fully understood like the purpose or the roles of the people that were involved. And I don't know if I was fully like satisfied with the ending, where the relationship ended up by the end of the story, because this centers around a couple with their baby that just moved into a new apartment, and their baby starts acting really, really strange. And there's some things going on with other people that are living in this apartment. And the apartment itself has its own kind of like myth and legend, and people are very like scared of it because of that. And honestly, I don't know how I feel about this book. It was intriguing and it was unhinged, and it really dealt with a descent into madness. And it was very frustrating to watch the main characters interact with each other, because they did a lot of things on their own, where they actually didn't communicate a lot of things and they kept a lot of things hidden from each other. And that really ended up giving a strain to their relationship, as they just both continued to spiral. And so I think Nat Cassidy really did that well. This really deals with grief and it deals with disability, because the main character is in a wheelchair. And so it has a very big discussion about disability and mobility and freedom and identity, and how that can connect to your identity, but it doesn't ultimately define you, or you allow it to define you to whatever extent that you want it to. And at the end of the day, you can choose to look at it through the eyes of being able to still have access to other things, having accessibility to things that kind of makes you free, or you can see it as a hindrance and let it keep you down. And that was kind of the aim of what Nat Cassidy was, the themes that he was exploring within this book. And he did a lot of like really good research in terms of that, and the feelings that the main characters was going through and their thoughts. And I really liked the resolution at the end in terms of the main character's feelings, but I wasn't completely satisfied with a kind of lack of explanation with her in relation to other characters, if that makes sense, without spoiling anything. The discussions about like losing autonomy were really strong and significant. But other than that, I don't really know how much I enjoyed the plot. I think it was just like a 3-star plot, but the writing and I guess like the how uncomfortable he makes you with his writing, and how you always want to continue to anticipate to see what the actual explanation is of what's going on. That was like made this a 3.5 star for me. The next book that I picked up was an arc called Revenants by Mel C. Bell. And this is a zombie apocalypse story, but it is so short. It's only like 55 pages, so it doesn't really explore very much. But we do have this main character who's dealing with flashbacks and family trauma. That this is a series, this is the start to a series, and so hopefully that will get explained more in the next book. But there wasn't too much to say about this. This was a debut, and so I feel like you could definitely see some issues with the writing, in the sense that the dialogue versus the prose switched up a lot in the way that the characters would like pronounce their words, because they had this set in the South, I believe, and so they have like Southern, and it almost sounded like patois. But then when the characters had their own internal monologue, then there was no accent that was apparent. It was only written with their accent when they were speaking to each other. And so that felt a little disjointed. But other than that, I think the prose was actually pretty beautiful. And the cliffhanger was really, really interesting. Like, it is definitely something that would intrigue me to want to continue reading, to figure out the explanation of what just happened, because the main character also ends up like hearing voices in her head. Like, there's something that's talking to her, but there's like a mystery that she doesn't know what it is. And she's also trying to, I guess, uncover family trauma from these flashbacks and also get through a zombie apocalypse. But there really wasn't a lot of focus on the apocalypse when it comes to explanations of like why, how long, like what's going on. It's not very focused on that. It kind of just ends up focusing on the main character and a soldier that comes and kind of saves her. I'm intrigued to see what the next installment will bring. The next book I finished in September, guys, This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. Holy shit. Yes, I get it. I get the hype. I get it. I believe you. everyone talks about this being one of their best books, and I get it. I am now on that train, and I loved the ride. I absolutely loved the ride. This was confusing because there really isn't explanation to what the Time War is, how they're doing it, kind of, and like why. And there really isn't like as much world building because every chapter goes into a different world, pretty much, which was very interesting to see where these characters would end up in each chapter. I feel like that isn't talked about enough when it comes to reviews that I've seen about this book. Like, people obviously focus on the love, which of course, but like the world building was interesting, if not confusing, but interesting to see how they were set in these different like historical time periods and how they would navigate through that. And like the way that they would send messages to each other was like how do you conceive of something like that? It's I've never ever thought or read anything like that before, and it was a masterpiece. And genuinely, I can still like see in my mind the unraveling of the ending and like how much power it held. And literally, I'm speechless. Like, I don't know how to convey into words the things that I felt and the things that I saw when I was reading the resolution and the ending. And like, this has got to be some of the most tender and like genuine love, and the way that they were talking about caring for each other and how poetic it was. And oh my god, oh my god, I cannot. Oh, this made me cry. I think, yeah, this made me cry because of just how beautiful it was. And I highlighted like entire letters, entire paragraphs. I can't even continue talking about this because I could just go on. So the next book that I finish, you can watch my September reading vlog to watch a live reaction of me reading Bunny. Very much a fever dream. Very much what the actual fuck is going on here. And it kind of, some scenes, specifically in the theater, maybe like reminds me of Donnie Darko in a bit, in a way, which, you know, fitting given bunnies. I don't like, there's not really much I can say about this, but it was compulsive. It was an easy read, and I loved the character Ava. Oh my god, she was like everything I want to be and more. Just like how distinct her personality and her style and like just her. She was so fucking cool, and I loved every second that she was on the page. And I honestly wanted more. Like, I wanted more of an exploration between the main character and Ava because I think their friendship was so beautiful. It did have some like dark academia themes, but also kind of like light and fluffy, literal fever dream vibes. And it was a delight to get through, honestly. Like, it was, I would definitely read something like this again. It kind of did end with ambiguity, but with this, I didn't mind. I really didn't mind. I think, like, it's just supposed to leave you, like, speechless and leave you like really wanting time to process what the hell you just went through with this. And I would recommend, I don't think you need to look up anything about what this book is about, but kind of just like go into it and like expect a ride, you know, don't expect anything, actually. Just don't expect anything. And then see where it takes you. I don't It was depressing at times. It was really interesting with the conversations it was having about femininity and like feminine rage, and also just like sex and the undertones of sex that was apparent throughout pretty much all of this, and how it's a very like evocative theme and how it's connected to a lot of different aspects of these characters' lives as a sort of motive. And yeah, I have more thoughts that if you want to watch my reading vlog, go ahead. That was a fun time. That was it for September. And so going into October, I ended up reading 5 books, 2 on audio, 1 on ebook, and 2 physical books. And this was a decent month. I had a really, really big TBR for this month because, you know, there was so much spooky themed and dark academia themed that I wanted to get to, or dark fantasy that I wanted to get to. But What I did get to was first, It Will Be Just Us. Oh, wait, sometimes I get this title wrong all the fucking time. Yeah, no, It Will Just Be Us by Joe Kaplan. And this was very entertaining. I really liked this book. It was very intriguing. It kept me hooked. It took some very interesting turns about this family that lives in a haunted house, and it's known to be haunted, and they accept that it's haunted because they can see memories and they can see ghosts of families that have lived in their family that has lived in this house in the past. And the main character ends up seeing an unfamiliar ghost, and it scares the shit out of her, and it was creepy as fuck. And this was such a good book. Honestly, the atmosphere, the dread, the claustrophobia, wow. I really enjoyed this. This also dealt with very toxic relationships and trying to escape from forced proximity and trying to battle with morality of what are you supposed to do in terms of defeating evil because the ghost of the child isn't acting nicely. And so the main character is very conflicted because it's like this evil child spawn. And she's like, what do I do? I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that, honestly. I definitely recommend this. Also dealt with really cool legends based around a swamp that their house is next to, which was a really interesting like twist and added a little bit more spice to the story. And it was very, very entertaining and intriguing and unsettling. And I think the atmosphere was done perfectly. And it's really cool because the main character is an archaeologist, I believe. So I really like that little like aspect as well. The next book I finished was The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. I wasn't even hesitant about picking this book up. This has been on my radar for a while. And the fact that this is 525 pages of a horror book is a lot, but I was so ready for this and it was so compulsive. It was so good. Genuinely, when I finished this, I gave it 5 stars. This book is dealing with the curse of a mine in a mining town in like Pennsylvania. It explores the dynamic of this family and their child when they move into the husband's old childhood home. And weird things start happening after the disappearance of a serial killer, but it's so much more cosmic than that. And I don't want to spoil anything else. And like the summary doesn't tell you anything, and I think honestly that's a good thing. I think this is full of surprises, and the because this is such a big book, this really gives you time to dive into the characters and their personalities and their motives, and it really gives them dimensions. And when you finish it and you recognize all of the threads that are being tied together at the end, it was very compulsive and it was a absolutely amazing book. Honestly, I highly recommend this. Don't be intimidated by it, honestly. It felt like I got through this really fast and I was having an amazing time with it. It deals a lot with trying to understand empathy as well as not prescribing to a idea or a fate about who you will become, but kind of setting your own path for becoming your own person and kind of going outside of the expectations of what people think or how people think you will behave or should behave. And if your fate is already written out, in a sense. It also very much dealt with the idea that the world is shit and there's so much shit that's going on in life that is really, really gets you down when you turn on the news, you look at the politics, you look at natural disasters, you look at like gun violence and just war and genocide, and it can get so overwhelming. And so it's hard to hold on to hope when you're constantly bombarded by all of this negativity and violence in the real world around you. So at the same time, what is it that you are supposed to hold on to? How are you supposed to keep that hope? Or who can help you hold on to the hope of it being a good world and your role in the world in making it a better place. And it can feel like you are such a small character in this big, big world. But at the same time, especially when you are surrounded by a support system, you can still do good and you can still show the world that not everything is shit, because there's still these little light at the end of the tunnel, literally. um, and this was a great experience. Honestly, I highly recommend this book. And I would love to check out other things that Chuck Wendig has written, because he has other really long horror books that I am very intrigued to check out now. The next book I finished was The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the second book in the Raven Cycle series, and I loved The Raven Boys. It was so atmospheric. It was like the YA adventure that I needed, and the fact that it's focused on this legend of this dead god or this old king that this group of friends wants to try and find is just like the perfect cozy adventure. And this second book was interesting. It definitely took a turn, and a lot of it was focused on a secondary character who I didn't like him. You're not supposed to like him. And I don't mean the character. I don't mean the Raven Boys that it's focused on, Ronan. I mean the other character that he is interacting with for the most part of this book. He's supposed to be unlikable, and he's a dickhead. And a lot of this book was focused on this other character and Ronan's relationship with him, which, the reasoning makes sense. But at the same time, it kind of left me a little bit disengaged, because, like, shit went wild. Like, it did, things were definitely elevated in terms of the I guess, the conflicts that happened, but I didn't find it as compulsive as the first one. I think this one had a very different tone, and I feel like I really want to get back into the vibe of being in the forest that they were discovering. I love that aspect, and I can still, like, feel what I felt when I was reading that in the first book, but this book felt completely different. And for me, it kind of lacked some of the same, like, cozy vibes, which makes sense because the stakes were high and the things that they were kind of discovering and the other people that were involved that were all trying to find this certain artifact was, again, high stakes. So it changed the tone of the book a lot. And I'm not sure, like, I still love these characters and I love the adventure that they're on. But the plot of this one specifically wasn't as engaging for me, unfortunately. Next book I finished in October was The Lantern's Ember by Colleen Huck. And I saved this specifically to read around Halloween, because this is centered around Halloween, and this is very much a kind of paranormal fantasy dealing with jack-o'-lanterns and vampires and witches. And it's YA, but a very, like, a main plot of this is like romance and all of these characters wanting to court the main character. And by other characters, I mean these immortal paranormal characters, very mature, wanting to court a 17-year-old. So, parts of this kind of made me feel uncomfortable because of how heavily it centered around lust, and it didn't take its time to fully develop interest between these characters to really set a foundation of the relationship between these characters and have, like, a slow burn or anything. Everyone kind of just automatically fell in love with the main character. I think that really overpowered some of the characters and, like, clouded their thinking, because at times that was, like, the only thing that they were thinking about. And I was like, okay, I understand that this is supposed to be like a romance, but maybe it's because I don't really read romances usually, but I don't know, some parts of that made me feel a bit uncomfortable, because it's like, hello, your lives are at stake right now. There's a lot of shit that's happening. You're being attacked. You are not in a good situation right now to simply be thinking about this one woman, this one girl's attention. I think the adventure that they went on was really interesting. I did enjoy the world building and the very kind of like cozy paranormal other world that they went through. I was just reading this to have a good time, honestly, and for the atmosphere, for it to be around Halloween. And at the end of the day, I really did end up enjoying how the characters cared for each other and kind of developed a found family based off the circumstances that they went on in their adventure. There was a decent amount of exploration into these other characters' backstories, which is good because this is a standalone, and so it's supposed to feel very like well-rounded. Yeah, this wasn't anything super profound or different. It was very much felt like a retelling of a fairy tale of some kind, and a happy ending type of story. And it was cute. It was entertaining. It was a little Halloween read. Hello there. It is now like 3 days later from the past clip because I didn't time things correctly. I had a meeting and then my weekend was just very, very busy. So here I am continuing to talk about what I read, and the last book that I finished in October was The Mark of the Damned by C.D. McKenna, and this is the second book in the Vaurelian saga, the first being The Blood of the Lion, which I read in I think April, and I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I really like the plot of it. I think it is very adventurous and ambitious because it's dealing with one of the main characters having to deal with these kind of like demons in a soul realm and being haunted, and another character who is the last dragon rider trying to discover his heritage, and then a damned king who is trying to get a hold on his country or his city, but they are starting to kind of view him as a monster. And so it is continuing with their stories. But this book was a lot more slow paced. Like we were getting the perspectives from each character, but day by day. And so it felt like it was moving very, very slowly, and it seemed very repetitive for me. And I really like wanted to be in the fantasy mood and have something with like an epic scale, but this one just felt very slow and repetitive for me, in the sense that by the end of each chapter, it felt like the characters just kept on repeating the same things that they had been saying by the end of their previous chapter. And they all kind of just had the same sort of message. And the whole book spanned maybe like less than a week or something. And something just wasn't clicking as much as it did within the first book. Though when I do look back on it, like I do still appreciate all of the no matter how slow they were, the advancements within the plot, and how there's still a lot more to look forward to within the next book, because we still had some pretty major plot twists happening to prepare us for the next book. But again, the sort of repetition from each character in each of their chapters, kind of just saying the same thing, was a bit annoying. But other than that, it was very intriguing what we learned about the dragons and history and the change of within the king's realm, and a lot more information about the soul realm. I still highly recommend this series. The third book just came out this in 2024, so I'm not sure when the fourth book would be out, but this is planned to be a pretty long saga. I'm not sure how many books, but I already got the third book on my Kindle, so I look forward to figuring more out about the Soul Realm. Next, in November, I ended up reading 3 books, but my reading by the end of the year got much, much slower because I went to visit my family in the States for almost 3 weeks, and I have also really been needing to study, so I haven't been reading as much, and I felt kind of slumpy that I didn't really know what I wanted to pick up or if I would even be able to finish any books that I had picked up. But regardless, and the first one that I finished was an ARC that I got on NetGalley called The Universe in Verse by Maria Popova. This is a collection of poetry about science, and so each poem is introduced with a little background text talking about the scientific discovery. So this talks about the numbered pi, gravity, it talks about the intelligence of the octopus, and it talks about radioactivity and Marie Curie. And so it talks about all of these specific scientific discoveries, and then introduces a poem as well as having an illustration. And it was one of the most beautiful collections I've ever read. And I would highly, highly recommend this, especially like as a gift. I think it would be a beautiful gift to give to someone who loves art and loves science. And so for me, that's like exactly my favorite. Those are 2 of my most favorite disciplines, and seeing them come together in a collection that is so beautiful was I absolutely cherish this. These are poems that are collected from a bunch of different sources and different people. So there is one by Maya Angelou, and I'm not really sure who else. I don't remember the names of anyone else, but it is more of a collection from other people to come together to celebrate the beauty and the art of science. It was incredible. It was beautiful. It was 5 stars. I would 10 out of 10 read it again. The next book that I finished in November was The Tiger's Daughter by K. Arsenault Rivera. And this was a complete surprise to me. I wanted to kind of just mood read, and I was looking at my shelves, and this had intrigued me before. Obviously, that's why I bought it. But I was kind of in the mood to pick up some like historical fiction because I really just wanted to get into like a slow story and something that really dives into characters' lives and gets this very long spanning story and find characters that I could fall in love with. And this was the perfect book that I could have picked up at that time. And when I tell you, I don't really read for long periods of time. Like, I like to try and read a little bit every day, but maybe that can be around an hour, sometimes less, sometimes more. It depends. But when I picked this book up, I picked it up, and when I tell you I couldn't stop, I'm telling you I read 222 pages in one day. I'm telling you, I didn't give a fuck about any other responsibilities that I might have had or might have planned for the day because all of my energy and all of my time, I think I spent like maybe 7 hours reading. I don't know. It doesn't even matter. It was the whole day. It was the entire day. And I read 222 pages in a day. I've never read that much in a single day. Ever. Ever. So when I tell you I'm attached, I can't even, listen. This is about two women that grow up together in a kind of Asian Mongolian inspired world where one is part of a very important clan and another is a princess. And they were born, I think, at the same time or within the same couple days. And so they kind of grew up together, but then there were moments of them being torn apart and then coming back together. And this also has a fantasy element of dealing with demons. And most of the story is written as a letter. So it's the letter from the one in the clan to the princess. And it's recalling pretty much their entire life story. And it's like a love letter too, because they're in love. And so it talks about how they grew up together and their journey and their love. And we really get to dive into the culture of the characters and the world that they're living in and see them battle with these demons. And we get to learn about the legendary history of their families because both of their mothers are very highly revered and highly respected individuals. I don't know how to explain this. I don't know how to accurately describe things. I just need to tell you to read this book. That's pretty much it. If you like historical fantasy and dealing with demons and lesbian romance and a very long generational story, please pick this book up. It's so beautiful. The final book that I finished in November was Nightborn: Cold Fire Rising by C.S. Friedman. And I picked this one up because one of you lovely people, one of my subscribers, recommended the Cold Fire trilogy. And it's a sci-fi, and so this novella is about this group of people going to find a planet for them to be able to colonize and to live on, because obviously at that point Earth is no longer habitable. And so this explores the pretty much exploration of this new planet, but things are going wrong because people end up dying and by some mysterious force. So this is kind of a mystery as to what this extraterrestrial force is that is killing the people. And this is set kind of as a history, a prequel to the Cold Fire trilogy, to get an idea about the planet and the history of the planet. And I picked this one up because I read like the first chapter of Cold Fire, and I was the first book being Black Sun Rising, and I was really, really intrigued. And so I think it definitely would be something that I would like to pick up. But since I saw that this was a prequel, I thought it'd be interesting to understand the history of the world first. But this one left me with a lot of ambiguity. I feel it really didn't set up a good like history and a good like, I don't know, answer to the mystery. I feel like I really wanted to explore more about how they set up civilization over long periods of time. Also, because I recognized within Black Sun Rising that there is a sort of like magic system. And so I figured that maybe it would be explained within this one, but it wasn't at all. This was literally just the mystery of people dying in really weird ways that was kind of connected to their consciousness and their mentality and like things that they were thinking. So it was kind of like their fears were coming to life. So that was really interesting, but I feel like the exploration into that theme just wasn't there. It wasn't enough. And I didn't really get much explanation because this was only really spanning, I think it's within a year, but the main story was set within a month or a couple months, maybe. I don't know. So it wasn't really enough time for like building up a civilization and a whole like colony and establishing a magic system. That's not what you get at all in this book. So it was kind of a letdown in that sense. So I think I didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to, but I still think that the idea of the planet and whatever this extraterrestrial force is very interesting, and I still do really want to pick up Black Sun Rising, but this did not reach my expectations, unfortunately. Finally, we are on to December, and in December I read two books, and I'm kind of counting it as three, but I've DNF'd one. So the first one was Solaris by Stanislaw Lem, translated from Polish. And I was reading this because I started a book club, and the people that join the book club are very much into kind of like classics and sci-fi and classic sci-fi. And so we are all very interested also in like consciousness because a bunch of us are psychology students. And so I think the premise of this book sounded really, really interesting, but I DNF this at like 60%, I think, because oh my fucking god, the writing was the writing. I could not really give any more fucks because the plot was moving at a almost backwards. Like it was almost not moving at all. And so there just wasn't enough exploration and enough intrigue to really make me care because the writing was so dense. Oh my god, it wasn't really giving me anything to fall in love with, you know? The writing was just very mechanical, it was dense, it was describing every little fucking corner in a room without it really having any significance. I was like, I've never wanted to skim through something so bad. And I just wanted it to end. I just wanted to get it over with. I just wanted to get to the end, but I couldn't even make it because there were maybe like 5 pages of a description of the world, but in very, very dense language. And so basically the world of Solaris is mostly an ocean. And so it's talking about these sort of structures that the oceans create that kind of look like buildings. Some things kind of look like, you know, civilization, but because it's so alien, the human words that we use to describe things on Earth, you know, weren't enough to describe such an alien structure and process and etc. And so it took like 5 pages to try and describe things in a very textbook manner, and it just wasn't interesting at all. If it was written better, if it was more engaging, if the pacing was better in terms of putting some interesting world building with the plot that's moving forward together and integrated it into a story that had better pacing, then maybe it would have actually been interesting. But it just wasn't. I never wanted to pick this book up. There's still like some intrigue into the idea of consciousness and how it's like this planet was said to have consciousness because it created these not humans but humans from the character's past for them to interact with. And so I still did participate in the discussion with my book club, and I think we did have really interesting discussion when we talked about why these humans were constructed for these visitors, and the interactions that they were having with each other, and why this happened, what it meant, what it has to do with consciousness, etc. So we did still have interesting conversations about it without me even having to finish the book. The fact that we only get the main character's perspective, and we also don't really, and the other characters are very, very secretive, and they don't really share much, and everything's kind of going on the set, and it was just, there wasn't enough exploration into the actual consciousness. We only get the experience of the main character, and it just wasn't enough for me to care at all. So I DNF this. I don't really know if I ever plan on picking it back up again. I think I'm good. The next book, the first book that I actually finished in December was Kagan the Damned by Jonathan Mayberry. I give this 4.25 stars. This was just picked it up on a whim. I kind of stopped creating TBRs, especially in the past couple months because of how overwhelmed I'd been. And so I saw this as an audiobook, and it was available, and I was like, okay, I hear really good things about this, so I'm gonna pick it up. And it was definitely interesting. I've really been craving fantasy, so I really wanted to get into this big, expansive world, and this one talks about gods damning the mortals, especially Kagan, who is one of the last survivors after one of the distant civilizations kind of overthrows the empire that he is serving. And so we look at how this new empire has conquered and is going to develop, and Kagan is swearing revenge on the new king that wants to ascend, and he wants to kill the king, of course, because he killed his entire family. And so this is an exploration into that, and this also deals with myths of Cthulhu, which was an interesting little twist because it follows Kagan and it follows another character. I forget her name. I think it's Reza or something. And her journey to another like island with another character, and something about evoking old gods, and kind of a war between those gods and the eternal king. And it was pretty fun. It was very entertaining, pretty dark. I've heard this being described as a grimdark, and as much as dark things happened, I don't know if I would fully call this a grimdark. But I maybe haven't really read that many grimdark fantasy books, so I don't really know if I am one to judge that. But this was very, very intriguing and engaging, and I liked the other characters that Kagan was interacting with, and the history that we get to see about the world, as well as certain like flashbacks that he's having that are kind of like prophetic dreams in a sense. And it was really, really interesting. I really liked it, and I do really want to get onto the second book because the plot twist at the end, I figured it out like as it was happening. That was definitely an interesting reveal. There isn't really like a specific fantasy magic system because this world has been because magic in this world has been like outlawed and has been taken away. And so this new empire that has taken over uses magic, and so I'm pretty sure that within the next book that we are still going to see like a new exploration of magic, and so I'm not really sure what that's going to bring, but I'll let you know when I get there. And finally, the last book that I read in 2024 was In the Ravenous Dark by A.M. Strickland. And I read this with Brooklyn at Brooklyn's Library as a buddy read. I sent her a picture of my bookshelves and said, hey, you want to do a buddy read? I don't really read a lot of the same genres as you, but pick something and we can read it together. And so she chose this. I'm actually really glad that she chose this because this was on my 24 and 24 list. And this is a fantasy romance standalone that's set in a world inspired by Greece, and it has blood magic that is really, really cool. It has a bunch of queer characters, it has a non-binary character, it has polygamy. This deals with a world where people with magic are brought into the kingdom so that they can be bound to a guardian, which is like a ghost who watches over them, kind of keeps them in line so that they don't have their so they don't get too powerful with their magic, because the empire still wants to control them. So you're not allowed to be seen in the city or just in everyday life with magic. If you have magic, you have to be conscripted to the like government and be registered with the king so that you can have a guardian being assigned to you. And so the main character gets discovered and she has to go to the kingdom, and so she has to now try and deal with being in a life surrounded by royalty with a ghost over her shoulder 24/7 and learn how to control her magic. The main character mostly just wants to get out. She wants to find a way to unlink from her guardian and run away. She doesn't want to be there. She wants to go to where her dad is from, which is another island. And so for the most part, she's plotting on how to do that. And so she wants to get information on the world and the magic and the death magic. And so I think learning more about the blood magic and the death magic, I think it would have been a bit more interesting to learn about the death magic. But for what we got, I think it was still kind of interesting. The magic system in this was super, super cool because they have what's called a bloodline, and it's kind of like a tattoo on your body, but it's with your blood. So the blood in your body is like brought to the surface that creates sigils, which are all of the sigils that you have learned that are created as tattoos on your skin, if that makes sense. So this was really, really interesting, the use of the magic and how she was like trying to discover how to use it. But something about this didn't quite hit. I think the world building was very interesting, especially learning about the history of the magic and the empire. And I really liked the characters that the main character becomes friends with and the romantic interests. But since this is a standalone, of course, like I feel like the romance kind of happened pretty quickly and kind of like an insta thing. One of them was a bit more of a slow burn. It was much slower than another one. I felt like I didn't have very much time to read, and so I ended up picking up the audiobook halfway through. And so maybe because of that, I wasn't as engaged in the book, but something about it kind of like lost its spark, even though the reveals were very interesting. Kind of like a lot of things happened at once, and there was like a lot of things to uncover, but at the same time, I don't really know how to describe like something that was missing that to make me really love this book. But for the most part, it was very enjoyable. I really loved the representation that was in this, especially really expressing queerness and celebrating queerness. And I think this is the first book that I've ever read that explores a polyamorous relationship. And I think it was really interesting to learn about the Guardian and like the underworld or the world of the dead and what the main character figures out about the Guardian and like his own motivations as well. I just think the ending was a lot. Like there were twists and turns, but then things twisted again and it kind of just became a lot where it's like, really, is this really possible in this world? Because that's, hmm. So I would still really recommend this, especially as a standalone and as something that has a lot more queer representation if you are interested in that. So that concludes all of the books that I finished in 2024. Thank you for sticking with me. This was quite the long list. I don't know if I want to continue doing like seasonal wrap-ups or monthly wrap-ups, but I do know that from now until the middle of March, I am still going to be very, very busy, and hopefully by then I will graduate. So after that, I hope to kind of get back to being somewhat consistent. If you want to leave me a comment, you can leave the tiger emoji in the comments for The Tiger's Daughter. Or you can tell me what your favorite book of the last couple months in 2024 were, or your favorite book of the whole year. I will be coming back to you real soon with the next video being my favorite books of the year. So I hope you are interested in watching that. If you are, you can subscribe so that you get notified about my videos. I hope the start of your 2025 is wonderful, and I hope you find some amazing 5-star reads this year. I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye!